majority. I'm a marketing consultant. Please don't hold that against me. Yes, I have a background in the technology world. Don't hold that against me. And yes, I have a background in the media world. We're going to talk today about the future of technology and a little bit on media regarding the high-tech corridor. Now, some of you aren't expert on this topic, so I don't want to pretend that we know more than you do. And in fact, if you do have some interesting statistics, Ken, or insights, Ken, I would encourage you to feel free to contribute to our panel. Today's panel is a very eclectic gathering of experts. To my right, that would be your left, that's your military left, is Brenda Young. Brenda and I have known each other for a couple of years. She was my introduction to BarCamp, and I have never forgiven her for that. She works with companies.
I did warn you.
I know you did. She works with companies to develop their marketing and web strategies using social and new media to integrate new technologies and innovations into their organizations. Brenda's worked with large companies to roll out new initiatives and small companies as well as micros to bring new products and services to market and in business development to expand current services and products offering. In addition to her company, she's the current director of the New Media Special Interest Group for the Tampa Bay American Marketing Association and helps plan events in social and new media. Brenda is also one of the key organizers for BarCamp Tampa Bay and Lunch 2.0. If you have not been to those meetings, you've missed out on a real treat. I've been to a couple of them and I've really enjoyed them. She's also helping to organize Health Camp Florida. When is that going to be?
It'll be end of first quarter 2011.
Okay, so we don't have a date yet, but it's going to be in end of the first quarter 2011. And for those of you who enjoy BarCamp, I think you'll also enjoy Health Camp. It's going to be a very different makeup of presenters.
Health Camp Florida is, the theme is the remarkable innovations that are transforming healthcare. So if any of you have a vertical in terms of healthcare, this might be something you'd want to look at. So we will be looking at cross-pollinating in terms of people who would be attending and the types of topics that would be covered. So technology, how new media may be affecting some of the things that are going on in the healthcare world, and policy development, some of those areas.
And on Twitter, Facebook, friend feed, etc., she is at the number 4, B as in Brenda, Young as forever. Okay. To my immediate left is Carl Buell. Carl is a very interesting fellow. Actually, all three people here are, in their own way, very interesting and fascinating. For those of you who don't know these folks, I would recommend you try to corner them before you leave and chit-chat with them for a few minutes. Carl started his company in the advertising agency business in Chicago, but hold on, it really changes. He started with the old stalwarts, the war horses, Leo Burnett, USA, Needham, Harper and Steers, working on national accounts such as General Mills, Pillsbury, Wrigley, and McDonald's. Now, for those of you who don't know who Annette Funicello is, you may not be able to understand this part of his resume.
Right.
Okay?
She was my first love.
She was my first love.
Oh, we have a problem.
And she was a bigamist. So anyway, in the 80s, he moved to Seattle. You know what's coming next, where he ultimately started his own consulting business. This led to a consulting engagement with a little company some of you might have heard of, Microsoft, which he subsequently joined at the executive level. Now, I worked for Microsoft as well as a consultant. Steve Ballmer was the presenter before me. At the time, Steve was still poor. He was only worth $6 billion, I think, at the time. I offered to hold his wallet in case it was going to weigh him down when he got on the podium, but...
Let me do I'd like to do a quick Steve Ballmer impersonation. Windows, Windows, Windows!
In fact, when Steve was speaking in front of me, he said, if we have a problem with our website, and about 150 people, they were all Microsoft people, agreed with him. And one guy brought up a real interesting thing. Steve said, why don't you email me and I'll get you something out tomorrow. So after the meeting, I went up to the manager. I said, you know, I hear this all the time in these meetings. Steve isn't really going to answer him. He says, Steve answers everybody one way or another, maybe a one-word answer, but he does his darnest. He's really sincere about that. At any rate, so much for Steve. At Microsoft, Carl led teams in corporate communications, advanced technology, internet tools, and MSN. During his tenure at Microsoft, he also had the opportunity to work directly with Bill Gates. Carl owns now a management consulting and business sales and acquisition company in Tampa, serving clients throughout the United States. So, as you can see, we have two people with two very different backgrounds, which brings us to the third person, who I got to know actually through Brenda, and that's Joel Lopez. Joel is an attorney by training. No booze, please. He's not practicing. And actually, when he did get into attorneyhood, not to be confused with Robin Hood, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, he actually worked in adoption. So as you can see, he's got a very different soul. And for those of you who are attorneys out there, and you're PI attorneys or divorce attorneys, please don't hold this against me because I'm not worth suing. All right. Joel also happened to be one of the founding members of Bar Camp Tampa. So if you have good things to say about Bar Camp the last 3 years, by all means, get a hold of Joel. If you've got bad things to say about Bar Camp, get a hold of Peter. Did I say that? So at any rate,
Joel's also working in Health Camp Florida.
well, I'm not supposed to say that, but thank you. So at any rate, and for those of you who missed that, just see Brenda later because I'm not allowed to speak to this. So we're going to start out with our Lollapalooza question. Now keep in mind, these three people have very, very, very different backgrounds, okay? What they bring to the table is information that some of you might say, geez, this is really great, or this does not apply to me, and I'm upset about it. And if you are, you're more than free to leave the room, or if you're really, really upset about this, you can see Peter. At any rate, here we go. As most of you know, there have been massive sea changes, not only in the economy of the United States, but also in the Tampa Bay market. Okay? So our first question is going to be our big loaded question, and that is how you view the scene of technology and media in Florida in particular, and if your expertise is outside of the local or regional market, how you see it at the national level. You can address it in whatever way you feel is appropriate for your level of expertise. You're not going to get dinged here. You may not be able to get back in Bar Camp next year, but you won't get dinged. So Brenda, we'll start off with you. How do you see the changes going on right now in the tech, the media world, employment-wise, growth-wise? It's yours.
Okay, so let's see if I want to approach that first. I guess the best way to start is to say that since this is Media Day, marketing and technology are bumping elbows trying to get through the doorway there now, and it's going to continue. So if you are in marketing and media and you haven't been paying attention, it's not going to go away. So all of the mobile things, all of the things that are happening that I would call new media, which are the other parts of mobile that are also on the web. So immersive technologies, augmented reality, virtual reality, all of those things are headed your way. And they're going to hit very quickly. They're going to hit quickly because they've been in development, and what's been lagging has been the ability on the mobile devices to be able to get large enough networks that are available for that, and then also smart enough devices, and we're seeing those happening right away. So how does that work back to Tampa and the tech corridor? There is a, through the last few years that I've been working down here in Florida, there are a number of people that are working in development on amazing things, and I see a bright future in the future. Shorter term, I see it still being a bit of a struggle. There's going to be a lag there in terms of people being able to get enough inertia to move things along and get things going. But we have core groups of people in a number of areas and a number of verticals that are developing things that are just mind-bogglingly amazing. So we have on the augmented reality, virtual reality, there's a core group along the corridor of people that are developing a number of initiatives, a number of different types of applications that you'll be able to see very quickly. And other types of verticals, as I mentioned with the healthcare area, we've got a large healthcare group all along the corridor. We have a number right here in the Tampa Bay area. They're developing a number of different areas and devices and applications, and you'll be able to see that. So I see a rosy future in the future, a future I would be defining as 3 to 5 years. Shorter term, we're still struggling.
Cool, thank you. Okay, Carl?
Okay. Well, I'd like to speak to technology nationally. In 2009, technology, or actually 2010, technology is still growing. I think nationally it's $232 billion. That was up almost 5% from the previous year. So we look at 2010, moving to 2011, and if you consider not only software, but also data networks and hardware, it's going to go, I think, from 3.4 trillion to 3.5 trillion nationally. So the sector is growing. What we're going to see, I think, as we continue to come out of this is, I would agree with Brenda, you're going to see an integration of media types, including pictures, obviously, text, video. We'll continue to see the integration of those things on all platforms, mobile platforms, PC platforms. And then the other thing we're going to see is just high-speed networks. What businesses are going to want to do is strive for what they would call business intelligence, an integration of all of these things in real time. So we're getting to a point where our high-speed networks are providing a, we've all heard about the data highway, but we're getting to speeds now where we can integrate all of these technologies and all of this data real time. And I think that's what's going to drive business in the foreseeable future. That is also going to drive acquisitions with the large corporations that need to continue to grow. Cannot, when you get up to the size of a Google or an Oracle or a Microsoft, you cannot sustain your shareholder growth organically, so you have to grow through acquisitions. And so small companies that provide services, intelligence, technology, products, hardware in these areas where you have customers, cash flow, and real EBITDA are going to be targets for these large companies. Real EBITDA is an emphasis.
I love it. Okay, thank you. Joe?
I can probably blend the two, which is saying Florida has historically been almost like a third world nation in some respects. Certainly it's not, despite the being the fourth largest state in terms of population, in terms of bank deposits, we're 18th in overall venture funding, or near there. We're 20th or 25th in seed and early stage, which basically says we're the equivalent of North Dakota.
Yeah, really.
Which you really wouldn't think. But as Latin American countries or China or India are third world nations are now competitive, Florida can now be competitive in the sense that we've historically really been a source for many of those acquisitions, whether it was aerospace or defense, or Intumi was funded here. Wikipedia grew up here. MapQuest was a spin-off of a local company that was bought specifically to turn it into MapQuest because the underlying technology was here. So a lot of those public entities and their growth, they come from here. And guess what? We can enjoy the same benefits as though we were in India, or as silly as that sounds, in the sense that yes, you know what? While we don't have the top level people working and sustaining seed stage companies, early stage companies, while we don't have an infrastructure built to support them, a lot of entrepreneurs we have amazing entrepreneurs in almost all of the major clustered, almost all the major fields, whether it's green, whether it's energy, whether it's healthcare, whether it's biomed, whether it's what we consider ordinary technology that's here, or many of the other leading technologies that are going to be playing a major role in our life. And we have the ability to, if done well and if we are lucky, that they are sustainable, but if not, they are a continued flow of more acquisitions for more large companies.
Cool. Thank you.
That's not much of anything, but
No. It paints a picture and a background of what we're dealing with, and the is just as important as the possible, which brings us to several issues. Most of the people in this room know where the growth in technology and media are going to be for the next 3 to 5 years. That's the foreseeable future. It's the 5 to 10 year period that's most important for all of us to get prepared for, because what you did the last 5 years really is dictating a lot what you're going to do with this coming 5. So if you want to really impact your future, is to get ready for 5 to 10 years from now. Now, in my experiences with the experts of technology, everybody keeps coming up with the same hotbeds. They keep talking about mobile technology. As of late, food and water technology have really risen into the top 10 in many of those discussions. The darling of the batch is green technology. Unfortunately, some of it is still, how shall I say, not being accepted. But, you know, if you're a pioneer in green technology, stick with it, your day is coming. Of course, today it's medical technology, and it will continue until we get down to where Captain Kirk could have his medical officer just wave her or his wand in front of you and do an analysis on your body. We have those machines right now, but they call them MRIs, and they're still too limited. Industrial military is still hot, and it's growing. So for those of you who think just because you have the illusion the war is winding down, that field is still wide open. By the way, for those of you who don't like that field, you know what? It's what brought us all together in this room.
You're here.
Because what most Americans are totally ignorant of, the #1 driving force of our economy was NASA, was the Pentagon. And the space program of the 60s brought you the opportunity to carry one of these around. I see a number of laptops here. If it wasn't for the Pentagon, if it wasn't for the space program, none of these breakthroughs would have brought you to this room today. Instead, you would be a tree trimmer, which is not a bad business. A plumber, hey, more steady income than being an independently contracted service provider.
It's looking pretty good today.
Yeah. Home-related technologies. In our lifetime, maybe sooner than later, Robbie the robot will be greeting us at the door. And the dog you walk today, you won't have to ever walk again, but you may have to change his or her transistorized relay caderm in order to keep him or her running. Which brings us to nanotechnology, which is still hot, hot, hot. The real question is where do you belong? So I'm going to ask the panel members, and I'm going to rig the question. We know the hotbeds of technology are still California, Boston. Most of you have missed out what has happened in Washington State. Most of you don't realize that Washington State is one of the largest innovation ecosystems in the country. Can anybody give me a definition of innovation ecosystem? Come on, I know you know it. Can I see a hand? Can I get an amen? Will someone pass the tray?
Amen.
Okay, then I'll give it to you, Wayne. Actually, it's really about forming Disneyland in technology. Now, you know when you go to Disney, everything's there, right? They have their 6,000 or whatever thousands of acres they have. They have their own power system, their own water system, they have their own transportation system, they have their own rides, amusement park, they have their own hotels, they have their own food systems, they have their own police system, etc., etc., etc. So it's all self-sustaining and it's all self-serving. All right? The same thing has been going on all over the world in isolated pockets for technology. Can anybody tell me what nation in the world is probably the most successful in forming innovation ecosystems for innovative and technologically driven industries? It's not the US. Yeah, Hong Kong is sort of a rigged game. I've worked there. It's a rigged game because it's so doggone small. And if you're British and you show up for work there, you know what they're going to call you? Filth. Do you know what that stands for? Failed in London, try Hong Kong. All right. What other nations in the world?
Canada.
Pardon?
Canada?
Not yet.
Not yet?
Not yet. I hope so.
Close, English speaking,
Sweet.
British common law.
India.
Pardon?
India.
Yeah, but it's so huge. It's still in the scary
Bermuda.
part. It's still in the formative stages. No, here it is. Ready?
New Zealand.
Ireland.
Israel.
Israel. Wow.
If you look at what Israel has done, years ago they set up $1 billion fund because they wanted to go from an agricultural to an industrial, to a tech-driven economy. You see,
And
Go ahead.
the reason for that is, because if you look at Israel, you've got a lot of very, very smart people.
Yep.
You have no natural resources.
Mhm.
So in order to compete and create jobs and create innovation with small business, what did they have to do? They had to use intellectual capital.
Right.
Because they had no resources.
Right.
And that's what, it drove it out of necessity and survival.
But by the way, the reason Carl's making these comments is he's working on a very interesting program right now. For those of you who might have an interest in what it would take for Florida or for Tampa to form its own innovation ecosystem, thank you. He would be a good person for you to talk to, because your future and mine is not tied to the Republican, the Democrats who are running for governorship. They never had a clue and they still don't have any. I'm sorry if I'm offending anybody here.
I'd be happy to speak about that for a couple of hours.
Yeah. But the reality is Israel has formed a very interesting system which is now in its own way being parroted in the state of Arizona. And I've already tipped my hand in Washington, D.C. And a city that's doing some of this work is, San Diego. Okay. So here are the hotbeds of technology here. And I may have left one or two out. You're free to shout out a city that I may have missed. For those of you who are in the back of the room, you can come and sit down on the floor over here or just take a space up on the wall if you like. Here are the hotbeds in America. Boston. There's 3 or 4 hotbeds in California where I lived for 16 years and worked with high-tech companies. Washington State. The principal country of Austin. Do you know what Austin is? It's an island of civilization surrounded by Texas. Virginia, as we all know, the Northeast or Northwest.
Up by D.C.
Yeah. That.
Not down by Richmond.
No. The hotbeds of technology outside the United States are, of course, Israel, India, Eastern Europe, China. Okay, who did I leave out in the States or outside? Do we cover most of the biggies?
Utah.
Utah?
Taking people that don't want the tax structures and labor costs and moving companies like software development companies going to Aura, things like that.
Okay, cool. All right, there'll be some new ones popping up. Here we go. So let's say, how many entrepreneurs, that's really not a good term. How many self-employed professionals do we have in the room? Okay, Brenda? Okay, someone died and we made you goddess.
All right.
Okay.
I've been waiting.
It's good to know that you've been waiting. All right, you now have the position, you're goddess. And here are your devotees.
Okay.
And they want to know, what the heck do I do with my career?
Ah.
Plastics.
You still want to be the old guys? You can always find an old guy in the room.
That's the question.
That's right. Another Dustin, never mind. Hoffman devotee.
Congratulations.
Well, I've identified 3 hot areas, and one of them is healthcare.
Yeah.
Another one is eco and green.
Yep.
And the third one is kind of a catch-all category of I would call immersive technology. So augmented reality, virtual reality, immersive, all of the things that would go with that. So the development, the devices, there are a number of new devices that are being developed in that area. The green part, I really think Florida is very well set for that. I don't know if any of you have researched the types of things that the University of Florida and the University of South Florida are doing in green areas. There are a number of things that they're developing on solar, on wind, on other types of alternative energy forms that not necessarily singularly, but in combinations really give you a continuous form of electricity and energy development. It's also a way during a hurricane or other types of environmental issues where you can have electricity available. I don't know if any of you are aware of what the grid system is like today. We've not really invested in it. It's got a lot of issues. They're being tackled, but there's still an overabundance of reliance on old energy forms, and they're not going to go away any more than the new energy forms are going to go away. But Florida has sunshine, Florida has wind, Florida does not have issues with earthquakes as much as other parts of the country, so you can do thermal types of things, because once you dig down deeply enough, you have a constant temperature, so you can do some things with that. On the wind form of that, there instead of the great big wind towers that you're used to, there's something called vertical axis. They provide a more efficient way of doing energy. So again, when we're talking about, this is why I know about this wireless telecom that I've been in. You don't have electricity, you don't have a network. And I think all of us are probably at some point or another worried about not having a network to do all the things that we want to do. So the 2 universities that I mentioned are doing a number of innovations. One of the things that you'll be seeing is that those great big panels for solar that are about this big, tabletop size here, will now be, the energy output that used to require this much surface area will now be about the size of the palm of your hand. So if you take the same surface area, it's logarithmic as far as the amount of energy that you can now generate with that. But then you can also generate it in other ways. So there's a book called The Electrification of America, and it was how electricity was adopted. And it's a good lesson. It's a really dry book. I can give you like a synopsis if you really want. But it does tell you how people adopted. So people adopt in context. So if a large factory was going to adopt electricity, it was going to do it in the context of, hey, I've got this machinery, it was 80 hours of man hours to get this together. If I have electricity, I can do the same amount of work with 1 hour using electricity. So you make those kinds of decisions, and the same kinds of consumer decisions are made when people are looking at things. Does it make sense for me to have a cell phone for my 10-year-old? Does it make sense for me to be doing, should I buy an iPad? Well, those are done all in context. So as we look at some of these things, if you look at a one-for-one on electricity, it's not just that it's going to be a cost savings, it's more what's the usefulness and what's the continuity that I need in order to maintain my electricity. So that's one area. I did talk a little bit about healthcare. It's certainly something that needs reforming, needs innovation, but the whole area, again, is being transformed with communications devices, with other types of devices that are being developed, a lot of them being developed here in Florida. There's a large community of people developing all of that. They have other things that they're doing. There's some amazing things happening with the newer devices like the iPads and the iPhones that people are using. And then the third area, which between, I maintain the corridors Jacksonville, Orlando, Tampa to Sarasota. And we have an intriguing group of people that are very involved in a number of areas that I would call new media and immersive technologies. And I see that as another area for Florida to really move forward.
Cool, thank you. I'm gonna ask a two-part question, but I'm gonna make it a one question. Here we go. How many of you are now in one of the industries or actively seeking clients in these industries as part of the makeup of your business? How many of you are into these games that Brenda just spoke about? 1, 2, 3.5 people. Okay. How do I know the half? Because they remember they did use the mention today. All right. Thanks, Brenda. Not bad. You did a nice job as goddess. Now, when you go home, despite what your husband may think, you can let him know you're the goddess. Here we go.
All right, it's really hard to compete with the goddess,
Yeah.
but I will try.
We'll give you a minor dukedom then.
Okay.
Okay, so the Duke of Earl, go for it.
I think your mention of food and water is interesting, because when the Department of Defense looks at future global wars, they're looking at food and water.
Yeah.
We're looking at the shortage of food and water, and that's going to become, those precious resources will become things that we could fight global wars over. So I think that's an interesting area that merits some look at the intersection of emerging technologies that will come in food and water. Obviously, the mobile platform is, I think that's a 20 to 25 year plus runway, because again, what we're looking at now is the integration of high-speed networks, and the mobile platform, as much as it has evolved miraculously over the last X number of years, it will continue to do so. We're hampered now by platform wars in the mobile sector. We've got Google Android, we've got RIM, we've got Microsoft Mobile, or mobile platform. And so if you're developing for the mobile platform, it's a tough decision. Of course, you can look at market share, but you more or less are at least committed to developing 2 platforms, if not, you can't just do just one. And right now, these devices are kind of fun and cool, and they're all consumer oriented. But I think as you look at the integration of faster speed, and businesses need for real-time business intelligence, what is the implication for this device? And it is obviously huge and evolving, and lots of room for innovation, and lots of room for integration. So that's a hardware kind of answer. And then I would look at industries where you ask the question, what are the industries that are data intensive? Airline industry is very data intensive. Retail, definitely healthcare, and utilities. And of those 4, if I were to pick a favorite, I would say healthcare is my favorite in terms of a need for immense data integration. So let's use your example of the MRI. We know with the internet today, you can have somebody who's analyzing, and they do analyze MRI scans or X-ray scans in Bangalore, wherever. Now, as that medical data becomes more real time and less static and more video oriented, and now you have the integration of multiple analytic systems that allow physicians and specialists not just to look at one thing at one time, but multivariate analysis at one time. That's when you have huge implications for the networks, for the software, for the systems, and for the mobile devices. So that would be, my favorite pick on the data intensive side.
Okay. So Joe, now you get to put on your God hat.
I don't think I have a god hat, and I
You
don't
don't?
think I qualify for a dukedom, so I'm going to be challenged here. I don't, and I don't have any broad statistics. I can say we definitely have some interesting plays here. I don't know how well we're going to do or not do. I mean, from the mobile platforms, I don't see a lot of companies that I'm aware of. I mean, I know of 1 or 2 that has a mobile platform that teaches utility utility employees how to deal, and that's a local company. I know of another local company that's, again, service-oriented, telling them how, other people how to fix certain equipment. Those have plays, they have a nice customer base, it's nice and growing, but it's never going to be a multi-hundred-million-dollar company. For the hybridization of media and technology, well, we have some gentlemen in the other room, several of them former publishers or Groupon competitors or X or Y or Z that are local. They're things that are coming out of here, but we don't have a lead on that, and I don't see us gaining a lead on that. So I see us having viable plays for acquisitions. In healthcare, I'm unaware of any real. I mean, we have some wonderful platforms and tools that are being built that are serving specialized niches, like Volt in Sarasota, that they're coalescing a whole set of services for communications for nurses and emergencies and whatnot. And you can see that going national without any problem. But how does that integrate within a larger context? I know that they're going to fit with something because they fit with almost everything. But again, is that a company that's it might be, it might not. It's certainly a fantastic, wonderful little company, and they're certainly going to do well. We have a lot of little plays in all these markets, but I don't see anyone that's an absolute, And funny, you were talking about green. Well, green and emerging, energy. We have a lot of plays there. If there's anything that I can name, a lot of companies that we have 2 or 3 of the leading battery companies that were not only contracting with NASA, but really fundamentally in the bidding for the new automobiles, and fundamentally in the bidding for. I mean, they have Solarcore over in Lakeland, that could power a cell phone for a month or 2 off of a piece of plastic the size of a credit card. Could power a Manhattan block with a piece of plastic that's the size of a car battery for an hour. And that was 9 or 10 years ago, before significant improvement. But again, we have a lot of clusters of plays. I don't see anyone who's really solidified their position that you can guarantee that they're going to be a breakout success, though. I mean, what we have is we have a portfolio of plays in the game.
Would you say that's because people aren't talking to each other?
I think that's our biggest disappointment. I think it's your shared disappointment, is that we at Barcamp, the state of Florida, have all of these wonderful resources, and very rarely do they ever talk to one another, and very rarely do we build a community, and very rarely do we nest 3 or 4 of them together, that they have the opportunity to really become something amazing.
Right.
More often, they're acquisition targets again.
And this is where the high-tech corridor fails its own industry, is that we don't have a vibrant innovation ecosystem. And you have groups that are advocates, don't get me wrong, but some groups turn into lead sharing groups instead of being real cross. I see the heads going like this. No, don't give me any names. Don't wind up the crowd here. We have groups that start as advocates for the technology field and get populated by those ugly people, the sales and marketing people. Okay.
Don't forget the ones that get populated by by large bureaucrats that say, we've got it under control now.
Oh, yeah. And so what happens is the many groups that, I should say many, the handful of groups that we have in the corridor have not been successful in building the environment that Joel is talking about. There have been some good attempts. There's some attempts going on right now, but they're far away from what the state of Washington has going for it.
Or Texas, or California,
Or any-
New York, Virginia,
Yep.
Research Triangle.
Yes, sir.
Say we had that. Say we had that communication, we had that integration between companies. What would come out of it? I mean, what is the advantage of that?
Well, first, there's a
Friction,
lot of
communication, hybridization, sharing of ideas, improving upon each other, you merge and you become, three becomes one, and you become much stronger because of it. You're now able to go acquire, instead of all of our companies being acquired by California, maybe we could acquire them. Almost all of it, in fact,
Well, that sounds like it's
Well,
more
and
of a
experience
capital, like
between
a venture
companies,
capitalist opportunity
too.
more than
Well,
a
okay.
technology
people in
opportunity.
The venture
companies,
capitalist
you know.
has usually a very short and small play in the game, but it is part of the environment, you're right. Let's take the most difficult situation of all, forget startups. Startups are startups, they're always going to be hard to do. For those of you who've started up your own businesses, you know how tough it is, okay? And some of you were cursed. You got a great client right at the beginning. They paid you $5,000 a day, and then they went away, and you expect the next one to pay you $5,000 a day when they actually were talking about $250, not an hour, a day.
Yeah.
You go, what happened to my life? Okay. The toughest play in this business is how do you take a 20 or a $60 million company and turn it into a 200 or a $500 million company? There are very few mechanics, that's what I call them, they get upset when I call them that, who know how to do it. This is such a specialized skill, it's unreal. And you take it, in fact, that's our friend Boaz Vinogrado. Boaz specially is doing just that. He's taken 3 companies from that small level, because they're not a mid-sized company, and he took them up to the small level of 200 or 300 million, took 2 of them to NASDAQ stock exchange, and 1 of them to the Swiss stock exchange. People like Boaz are really rare, and they're very valuable finds. And to me, it's impossible to accept that a guy like him right now is looking for a client. Because there's a ton of those companies out there looking for him, okay? We don't have that hotbed. We don't have those people who put people and connect them. Hey, Joel is often looked as a connector, and if you sit down with Joel, see the face he just made? Joel,
I'm not a connector.
Joel will say, I'm not a
I know 1 or
connector.
2 people.
Okay. And you know what? Sometimes that's all it takes. But what Joel's self-confession, must be Catholic, Joel's self-confession at the moment was what? I don't know enough people to my satisfaction.
Okay.
Okay, is that fair?
Yep.
All right. And by the way,
And
when
that's true of all of us in this room.
well, no, I'm sure we got
And
some.
that gets to the essence of the answer to your question.
So it's more than just looking for the venture capitalists and the investment bankers. We're talking about also the idea breeders, the cross-pollinators. I'm starting sexual now, forget it. And you're putting all these pieces together. And the fascinating thing happens when you've got that environment going. In my industry, I had that. In my industry years ago, US Air put a bid out to 22 companies. I was the smallest company. Company was a joke. It was me, myself, and I. We had the second highest price. And they kept fighting with me. They wanted to hire me, but they wanted me to break my price in half, and there was no way. When I doubled my price, an amazing thing happened. They signed a contract. Don't ask, it's a long story. In my particular case, I was very fortunate because I was at the heart of the American Management Association in New York. And for me to put the team together that it took to make that program work for 2 years for US Air was a snap. Because at that moment in my life, I knew all the players. Or if you're from Chicago, Detroit, or Youngstown, Ohio, I know a guy who knows a guy. And in this industry, there's not enough guys and gals who know enough guys and gals to make that magic happen. And I'm going to take an opposite view just from what Carl said. I believe there's at least one person in this room that in their niche in Florida has all those type of connections. And you know what they're doing right now? They're doing this. They're sitting on their hands because they're afraid if you find out, you're going to take up the next 3 weeks of their life 24/7 because you can't get enough information from them. Most of the people in this room can't use this information. Do you know why? They're like me. They're addicts. You know what they're addicted to? The work. They're not addicted to growing their companies. And that's part of the problem we have here, which hasn't been brought up yet. We are not a market of entrepreneurs, we are a market of self-employed professionals. Even if you have 200 employees working for you, if you get up every morning with one thought in mind, how do I make payroll? You're not an entrepreneur, you're a self-employed professional with a lot of employees. What's the difference? An entrepreneur is like Evita Peron or Imelda Marcos. There's never enough, you can never have too many pairs of shoes. A self-employed professional is about making his 401k plan come alive. They do CPR on it every day. All right.